What's up, guys? It's Chandler from Team No Leek, accompanied by my teammate Kobe, and we are bringing to you our fifth episode of our Team No Leek podcast. Kobe, you want to take it away with starting what we're doing?
Yeah, of course. Today we're just going to be going kind of over a Madison meta preview, listing what decks we find to be in what tiers and how we think they're going to do in Madison, as well as how much of these decks we expect to see in Madison. So we'll just go ahead and jump right into it with our Tier 1 decks, which are going to be Reshizard, Zapdos, and Stall. So we'll just go ahead and get in on Reshizard immediately. It's been a proven archetype already, as it just came out of Unbroken Bonds, and it's really been a while since we've seen a card come out of a set and just dominate regionals like Reshizard did. So it's really surprised me in the way that it took a ton of spots in regionals and as well was able to win one.
Absolutely, yeah. Reshizard took 2 of the last 3 regionals of this past weekend, and we'll probably see a big showing of it in Madison as well, considering how consistent it is, how powerful it is, and how well it answers to every other deck in the format.
Yeah, one of the things that's really impressed me about it is the way it's able to be so versatile and how you build it and what text you're able to put in there. So it's really just a strong deck that has a lot of great matchups. I'd definitely be considering it, as it is a strong proven archetype. Every attack on that card is good, as well as the 270 HP it has, so it can really deal with a lot of matchups and a lot of decks. And what's impressed you about it, Chandler?
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, how versatile it was. We thought it would just be a straight, punch you in the face deck, straight up aggressive, with your Welders, your Kiaweis, and other things like that to help it boost up that energy real fast and just, like I said, punch you in the face. Where we've seen kind of different variants of Reshizard. The Jirachi Reshizard variant, the
Greens Reshizard.
The Greens
variant.
Reshizard. Even with Snorlax teched into it and Volcanion in it now. There's just a lot of different ways actually to play Reshizard, and it's kind of interesting to see.
Yeah, and after Santa Clara, I went in to build my own Reshizard list, and I was kind of starting to think that I wanted to play a more techie list that played things like Turtonator, Shining Lugia, and maybe even Arcanine in my list, but as I looked at Keon's list, read a little bit about what he had to say about it, I was really starting to be convinced by the 4 Volcanion line, as it is just consistent straight up, and it doesn't mind going second, which is a big advantage that decks have.
Yeah, exactly. With the Volcanion being in the active, going second actually doesn't hurt you as bad if you can get that fire attachment first turn. Because being able to attach, 3 energy?
Yeah, 3 energy
on if you go
1.
second, yeah. Is pretty insane, and that really boosts up that Reshizard immediately. I mean, all you have to do is attach next turn, and that Reshizard is swinging right from there on.
Yeah, and your chances of starting it are really, really good as you play 4 of those and only 3 tag teams, 2 Reshizards and then the EV Snorlax. And all of those cards are really good to start with. You can get the Welders off earlier. Just be really aggressive or really set up with Volcanion.
And like you were saying earlier, all 3 of its attacks are absolutely phenomenal. Especially Outrage. I've seen Outrage actually been played more than I thought it would be, considering you have Zapdos going up against it, only putting a little bit of minimal damage on it, maybe 110 to 140, 170 maybe at most, or even at 80 if Zapdos doesn't have the most optimal play available.
You're still doing 110 to them.
Yeah, 110 even, yeah with the Choice Band or Electro Power or something. But Reshizard then being able to answer back with Outrage is what I was actually talking about.
Yeah, okay. So I was talking about how Reshizard could just hit 110 of Zapdos and only does 80.
Right.
So it's really great math for it. And Outrage has always been kind of a decent attack that we've seen on a lot of Pokemon, but we've never seen it on a Pokemon that has 270 HP. So that attack you can get a lot of value out of if your opponent can't one-shot you.
Yeah, and even up against Weezing as well, that Outrage is insane considering how much damage is going to be put onto Reshizard and all of the basics every turn, and being able to answer back with Outrage onto the Weezings as well with a little bit of minimal damage as well.
Yeah, and one of the big things I've seen about Outrage as well is if you're going against a Zapdos deck or a Pikarom deck, you can kind of just Outrage throughout the game, and it won't force you to put a ton of energies on the board to get a Tapu Koko GX swing off on you. So it's a really strong card, and it can hit 300 with the GX attack, 230 with its attack, and Outrage has a really high damage cap as well. So I definitely wouldn't be taking a loss to it going into Madison.
And even being able to get away from that Frost Rotom play as well, being able to just Outrage against Weezing and not being able to go into that Frost Rotom play for the other opponent.
Yeah, because Frost Rotom can't just straight up one-shot you as long as you actively play around it, which is kind of why I've been leaning towards the Mimikyu in counter energy style builds, as it can just always get that 230 off against Reshiram Charizard, and with Weezing ticks and Shrine ticks, that's really not too bad of a number to hit.
No, it's not. And that's something I've kind of been debating in my Weezing list, is whether I'm going to play Mimikyu or Frost Rotom. Frost Rotom's proven to be better for me so far. I haven't done a whole lot of testing with the Mimikyu tech in, but it's going to be interesting to see what we see in Madison as far as what Weezing players are going to decide to tech into their lists. So we were talking about Zapdos earlier about how if it only hits the Reshizard for 80, it's going to be knocked back out for 110. But its other matchups and even being able to Tapu Koko GX right afterwards into a Reshizard for knockout is going to be very optimal for Zapdos.
Yeah, not a ton of these Reshizards were playing the healing counts that Keon was playing in his list, so if decks fail to adapt that healing strategy, Zapdos can kind of just 3-shot a Reshizard pretty easily and then just kill it with a Tapu Koko GX. So the Zapdos and the Buzzwole math adds up pretty well to kill a Reshizard, so if you know your opponent's not going to be playing healing, it's definitely a decent strategy to go towards. If not, something like Nihilego might be the best call to counter Reshizard in that.
Definitely, and like you were saying, Zapdos can afford to go down a couple of prizes in the game. It can probably afford to go down 1, 2, maybe even 3 in some games down in prizes, just to get that multiple turn knockout on a Reshizard and just kind of take that game halfway.
Yeah, and Zapdos is just such an aggressive deck that even with its bad matchups, you can kind of just run your opponent over before they even get started. So it does have some bad matchups. Zoroark's always been kind of unfavorable, but with things like Stealthy Hood in the mix now, you can even counter that Muck by putting one on your Jirachi. And if you have, there's been plenty of times playing Zapdos that I've had switch cards in my hand, but I just can't use Stellar Wish because of a Muck, and the Stealthy Hood can really help you in those situations.
Yeah, definitely. And we see it still be positive matchup against Zoroark sometimes if you can get rid of those basics quickly, those Zoras and those Meowths and even other basic Pokemon in the deck. The Ditto especially hurts going up against Zoroark. It still holds a very consistent place in Tier 1 amongst this meta.
Yeah, and while Zoroark's never really been a great matchup for it, I think it does get a little better as it doesn't really have the best of responses to Baby Buzzwole at the moment. Yeah. So if you can get a Guzman, something like a Persian, then your opponent really might just not have an answer to that Baby Buzzwole immediately.
Exactly, and like we were talking about the other day, the deck Zoroark goes from a Zoroark deck, Lycanroc, from only being weak with Zoroark to the Buzzwole, now to being completely weak to Buzzwole, period, with the Persian and the Zoroark now.
Yeah, the Buzzwole's definitely going to be doing a lot more damage against your Zoroark decks, and I'd maybe be playing at least one Devoured Field so that you can have an answer to that throughout the game.
Yeah, absolutely. As well as you see the Persian actually smacking for a lot of damage now, considering if you can get enough Pokemon in the discard and just being able to be a viable attacker in almost every matchup.
Yeah, so it's definitely something that can be won by Zapdos, and it is getting easier to play against those Zoroark decks, but it does have some pretty sketchy matchups as well. Weezing is pretty tough for it, and Zapdos right now isn't really winning games based off of its matchups, but just kind of based on its pure aggression and strength.
Absolutely. And kind of going up against Stall, I think Zapdos struggles with Stall. If Stall can heal off quickly, Max Potion, Acerolas, discard your energies, I think Zapdos pretty well struggles with Stall. And talking about Stall, we have seen it make a big come up this last weekend in all 3 of the regionals. Lucario Melmetal being the main Stall list that we see, as well as maybe a couple of Vileplume counts. Kobe, what do you think about Stall?
Yeah, and Stall is a really strong choice right now, and I actually thought it would be the deck to take down Santa Clara Regionals, and something that Lucario Melmetal actually brings to the table is some aggression that other Stall decks lack, as it can just kind of take 6 prizes on you at times, and with cards like Vileplume, they are easily countered by either Stage 1 lines or things like Stealthy Hood, but I think people are expecting Vileplume counts to go down because of these counters, and so they may actually just be cutting the counters. I know I actually have myself in my Reshizard list. I cut the Stealthy Hood, so it definitely is still a strong play, and Vileplume may be a viable strategy to go with that.
Yeah, and like you said, this is a little bit more of an aggressive Stall deck that we've seen as opposed to the last Stall deck that kind of made a showing at 3rd place at Collinsville with Riley Holbert's Wacky Smacky. It's not an aggressive. His list wasn't an aggressive Stall list, whereas the Lucario Melmetal, you can take those knockouts like you just said, as well as its GX attack being so good, considering you can discard all of the energy off of the big Tag Team GX Pokemon you're discarding. You could possibly have the potential to discard 4 energy off of a Reshizard or a lot of energy off of a Pikarom, as well as doing 30 less damage for the rest of the game, which pretty much makes your Zapdos matchup and even your Pikarom matchup, their Electro powers, worthless pretty much.
Yeah, and don't forget about things that it has, such as that GX attack that minuses 30, and the Metal Frying Pans that not only minuses 30, but removes weakness, which can be a huge thing against deck like Reshizard. And Lucario Melmetal is just such a strong card in a vacuum, and the cool thing I see with Stall decks right now is that you can play them in best of 1 now because of cards like Lucario Melmetal. And another cool thing I've seen with it is I do think that in a best of 3 and a best of 1, these stall decks have to be built very differently.
Yeah.
I think a very aggressive stall deck could do well in a best of 1, whereas more of a traditional stall deck would be better in a best of 3.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting thought. I didn't take into account when you talked about maybe playing stall this weekend for the Cups. I didn't think about going the more aggressive route with the stall, maybe giving me a better matchup as opposed to maybe going a best of 3 route where you could play a little more casual, a little more slower, and hope for the best there.
Yeah, and your opponent can't really just sit there and kind of go through the motions and time you out of the game. I know I've played decks like Passimian before against stall, and I don't even have to try to slow play to get a tie against stall in a best of 1 in team-up formats. So I think stall is a really aggressive archetype now, and it can really be really controlling against your opponents, and I would definitely be taking it to Madison if I was going.
Definitely, and we didn't even talk about, not the other tool cards for the metal Pokemon, not just metal frying pan, but as well as metal core barrier for the 1 turn 60 less damage, and then metal goggles,
yeah,
and that takes off abilities, I believe.
Yep.
Is that correct?
It makes it so your opponent cannot take damage counters from abilities and attacks,
which could be really good against Weezing, which Lucario Metal Stall already has a really good matchup against Weezing, but if you're playing, with Metal Goggles in it, that just makes the matchup even that much more achievable.
Yeah, and Chandler's talking about Metal Goggles, and Metal Goggles is also great against things like Decidueye.
Yeah.
But I'm just kidding. We're going to get into Tier 2 now. The top deck we have at Tier 2 is going to be Zoroark. Zoroark's been a proven archetype for almost 2 years now. Me and Chandler had kind of a disagreement about it earlier in this format about whether it would stay viable. I think Zoroark is always just going to be a viable option in every meta it's in. Chandler kind of thought it was getting power crept a little bit, and more aggressive decks would be able to steamroll it.
Definitely. Like I said, I will take the complete and utter downfall, I guess, to calling out Zoroark for saying it wasn't going to last in this meta. I am wrong. It is versatile. It will go in every meta as long as it is in standard. Even in expanded, it will stay very viable, and I was just completely wrong kind of going into it as soon as Unbroken Bond's released.
Yeah, and that's kind of something I was confused about because me and Chandler have been big advocates. We play other decks and then we're like, why are we not just trading, Zoroark's so good, and I think you have tons of options with it. Persian, Slowking, Dugong, and even people are playing Silvally if you can find a decent list for that, as nobody's really trying to leak that right now. But Zoroark is a proven archetype that you definitely need to watch out for, as I think there will be more in Madison than there was in Santa Clara.
Yeah, and even going into that Persian card, it is absolutely insane. I mean, I did not realize how insane of a card this was until actually testing the Zoro Persian list. And, every single thing on that card is amazing. The only thing that I would probably complain about the card is the 200 HP as opposed to a 210 HP Persian. That makes the Zapdos plays a little bit better, makes your Shrine plays a little bit better. But everything else on the Persian is amazing. The ability, being able to search for 2 cards, anything in your deck, anytime your GX or EX is knocked out is absolutely phenomenal. Sets up your next turn perfectly, or at least it should if you're playing it along with Zoroark, as well as the Vengeance attack. If you get a lot of Pokemon in the discard, you can potentially knock out Pika-Roms. Anything past 240 really. 240 and under you can potentially knock out with the Persian. And the GX attack is similar to what we saw with Golisopod's GX attack, which was also insanely good. So I think this is a really good partner for Zoroark in this meta.
Yeah, and that's kind of where the separation ended up being between me and Chandler on these Zoroark decks. Is I looked at Persian, and after I realized that it wasn't just a coming into play ability and that you could use it every turn when the GX Pokemon was knocked out, I already had been suspecting that the attacks were incredibly good, as being able to hit 190, and then when you kind of just do that math in your head, 220 with Choice Band, and then you add a Kukui to that to do 240. Yeah. So I definitely think it can be used as a Pika-Rom counter. Not as good as a straight hard counter as Lycanroc was, but with Pika-Rom kind of decreasing in play just a little bit, I think the Persian can get it done in a regional setting.
Yeah, definitely. And I've been playing around with many ideas with Persian, considering, you have the Make and Pay Persian, which is super spicy against stall decks or any unknown hand deck. If you play Salazzle hand, that is also something you could use Make and Pay against, which would be very good. I don't see Salazzle hand being very good in this meta right now, but I've heard a little bit of talk about it. It could be a thing, and Make and Pay really makes them pay.
Yeah, Make and Pay is really just a strong card that until you use it, you won't really see all the great matchups it has for you. It can really give you a good advantage in Zoroark mirrors, as you can kind of go in with that one prize attacker to swing up the prize trade with that and still be able to discard a ton of resources from your opponent's hand, as well as things like Zapdos, because usually against Zoroark, Zapdos is trying to build up to kind of an end-of-the-game play to not take a big one-shot. So Make and Pay can really be great in a lot of scenarios that you might not even expect it in.
And, going back to Zoroark's versatility, you can play, a good count of whatever Persian Meowth line you want. You can play two Meowth, two Persian GX, and one Make and Pay Persian, for the 2-2-1. You can go two Meowth, two Persian GX just for the straight up power of Persian GX. You can switch up that Persian line pretty much however you want, as well as adding in the Slowking line and the Muck line and every other line that you have in that deck, and that's just the versatility of Zoroark, which is amazing, as we've seen before.
Yeah, and the only thing about these Zoroark decks is they are kind of getting tight on space to put cards in your deck, so it could even be a better play for Cups, as you can really eye out your local meta and see what's going on there before you make your tech choices. So Zoroark is definitely something I'd consider for Madison, and definitely a play for Cups this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that kind of Kobe suggested to me for this weekend going into the Cups in Tulsa is maybe a possible 2 judge count in Zoroark. I've been testing it online. It's pretty dang spicy. It's going to disrupt a lot of Reshizards, a lot of Pika-Roms, unless they're playing the Jirachi variant. It's going to disrupt a whole lot of decks, honestly, and especially Lucario Memetal as well, getting up that huge hand and then just judging immediately afterwards.
Yeah, and when I was talking about Zapdos, I was saying that Zoroark doesn't really have a great answer for things like Baby Buzzwole, but we actually do have an exact counter for that in this meta, which is going to be the Unbroken Bonds Marshadow.
Yeah.
That Marshadow is just kind of a pretty strong card in a vacuum, as you'll get a ton of value out of it in the Zapdos Buzzwole matchup, and even more value in the Zapdos Beast matchup, as it will kill the Kartana, the Nihilego, and the Buzzwole. So it's a really strong card, and that ability isn't to be taken for granted, as it's a searchable stadium removal.
No, absolutely. And even the attack for the 80, weakness on Baby Buzzwole, that's going to knock it out. And even if they were to play, Be Cheeky and Cheeky and play the the Buzzwole GX, you attach a Choice Band to the Marshadow and you're going to knock out that Buzzwole GX, and how they answer that really with just a basic attacker like that.
Yeah, and with a lot of Zoroark decks playing 2 Rescue Stretcher now, you can really get that Marshadow off multiple times in a game where it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on from Zoroark, we also see, not moving on from Zoroark, but seeing other partners with Zoroark is Silvally. We saw it a little bit from, I believe, Sao Paulo.
Yeah, it was Gustavo Wada.
Yeah, Gustavo Wada, and that's a really interesting idea. I had played around with Silvally, more so with Ninetales, just to search out those memory cards. Seeing it paired with Zoroark is a little bit more interesting to me. I don't know if it's the better partner than Persian, but it's definitely, like I said, interesting to see.
Yeah, something about Silvally that I have is that I originally partnered with the Ninetales, which is when me and Chandler collaborated on the idea of it. And I thought it was a good counter, but I've really been trying to get a lot of value out of that Turbo Drive attack from Silvally, and that may just not be the option, as Zoroark decks usually aren't playing basic energies now, so I doubt Silvally lists currently are, and that Turbo Drive attack you may just need to settle for doing the 120, but it does also have a ton of options with memory cards, so it's really a strong card that can swing a lot of unfavorable matchups for Zoroark.
Well, and something we had also discussed too is when we were discussing Silvally is, how do you utilize its ability in Zoroark as well as you can, as opposed to just being Silvally by itself. How many basics are you really going to have out in a Zoroark list? You really want your Zoroarks out as much as possible. If you're playing Persian or Silvally with it, you're going to have a lot of stage 1s out still.
Yeah, usually it's just going to be Tapu Lele that you're going to be able to get that ability off with, and maybe a Dedenne GX here and there.
Oh, and if you're really lucky, sometimes you don't even have to play Tapu Lele or Dedenne. Sometimes you just get straight up, Zora's on the list, or Zora's on the bench, sorry, and Zoroarks evolve next turn, and then, you're pretty much left with the stage 1 field the rest of the game.
Yeah, and that's the dream with Zoroark, that you just draw that Lily in your opening hand and you don't have to use Tapu Lele for it. And then also with that, you have to get everything you might want off the Lily, or you might have to use that Dedenne GX. So you can get value with that Silvally, but I really just think Persian might be the better option right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I was about to say, I think the most optimal partner is probably Persian GX in this meta. I think this Silvally just had a hot run. You can use that Zoroark to draw into those memory cards, and I think he just got some good matchups and a good run, and I think that's kind of where Silvally kind of stays with that.
Yeah, and something I actually just kind of thought of with Silvally is you could even play it as a Tekken Zoroark Persian, as opposed to something like the Slowking, as you can just kind of slot those memories in there and then search them with the Persian.
Right.
So Silvally may be a card that slips into some Zoroark lists, but I might actually expect it to be seen alongside Persian.
Well, and I think something that hurt as well is losing that Lycanroc GX's GX attack. The Dangerous Rogue, and I think that's why Silvally would be a good maybe a good tech, maybe a one of as a Ditto evolution to still utilize that dangerous rogue attack because it is still very viable in this meta.
Yeah, that Rebel GX is actually insane. As we know, Dangerous Rogue has been insane, so it's not an attack to be slept on, and it can punish just about any deck right now.
No, absolutely. And talking, with Persian being able to knock out Pikarom, speaking of Pikarom, talking about it more and more, seeing how Stall can, negate 30 damage every turn or for the rest of the game as a comparison with their electro powers. How well does Pikarom handle Stall? How well does Pikarom now handle Reshizard, which we know Pikarom doesn't handle Reshizard very well because Reshizard is more of a punch you in the face deck than Pikarom is. I think it struggles with a lot of these tier 1 and tier 2 decks.
Yeah, and something about Pikarom is it's always kind of had a decent Stall matchup, especially when it's playing the Jolteon GX, and most lists don't actually play the Jolteon GX anymore as there's really just not space, so
right.
Stall can really take advantage of that, and it also has that minus 60 damage that you can get with Lucario Melmetal, and then a tool attached for that, so
right.
That's really only making your Full Blitz attack do 90 damage base, so that's really not enough with a 260 HP Lucario Melmetal.
Right, and even if you were to use Full Blitz, and you weren't to use that Lucario Melmetal, GX attack, you're still, you need to hit that 260, and that's a Choice Band and a Electric Power, which isn't too hard, but then you add on to the GX attack with the Lucario Melmetal, and now you need to hit Choice Band and 2 Electric Powers, or 3 Electric Powers,
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a lot, honestly, asking for 3 Electric Powers in hand, unless you're, stockpiling them, which a lot of smart players do. A lot of Zapdos players also do that. They stockpile those electric powers in hand, but it then just starts to struggle with Stall.
Yeah, how are you going to do that twice, though? And
exactly.
One of the big counters to Stall with Pikarom has been that Tapu Koko Prism Stars. It can kind of just one-shot Hoopas, and with Lucario Melmetal being kind of an aggressive card, you can actually kill that Tapu Koko Prism Star now, so I don't think Pikarom actually has as favorable of a Stall matchup as it did in the past.
Right, well, and even now, if you do that Full Blitz option, you're just going to get answered right back with Lucario Melmetal's GX attack and just discard all of that energy off the active Pokemon.
Right.
If they put all 6 of that energy onto the active Pokemon, how do they really answer that? They don't really.
Yeah, it's not something like you have to find your Articuno and your Rainbow Energy. You're just using that Lucario Melmetal anyways to tank hits, so it's really a strong deck against Pikarom, but Pikarom kind of just doesn't really have great matchups at the moment, and while it is a strong card and has strong attacks, I think it just kind of gets outclassed by Reshizard and other decks.
And even Zoroark still having an answer to Pikarom. You had Lycanroc previously, which had weakness, and that was an answer to Pikarom. Now you even have Persian that can also answer to Pikarom. It's a little more work than Lycanroc was previously, but you still have the answer with the Zoroark matchup.
Yeah, and Pikarom, it's a good deck, but it's not something I would be considering taking into Madison, as it kind of just doesn't stack up to the Tier 1 decks right now.
And even talking about another tech, we have Mew in this format now, which really hurts Pikarom. It's a Tag Bolt GX attack, and not being able to utilize that 170 onto the bench is very hurtful. That kind of shifts the game for Pikarom entirely.
Yeah, and something we saw last format is it really took about all 3 months of the format, as long as Team Up was legal and standard, to really get a defined Pikarom list is what was the best. So I think there's a lot of discussion and differences in the Pikarom list right now, and I don't really think it's really a stable archetype right now.
No, it's definitely not stable. I think there's just too many options and too many ways trying to make it work, and I think sooner or later it's probably going to drop down to Tier 3. Unfortunately, especially with the Mew going around with the Tag Bolt. And speaking of the Tag Bolt, with the Mew, we have Mew also negating Weezing.
Right.
Weezing is going to hurt very much when playing against Mew, considering you won't be able to do any of that spread to the bench.
Right.
So Mew is just a good tech, and it's going to be a good tech in Zoroark. It's going to be a good tech in probably Zapdos in some cases.
Yeah. Well, the thing about Mew is just the Mew doesn't really counter Weezing. You kind of actually have to play a 3-card package to counter Weezing.
Yeah.
And you got to play Double Blower or a Blower and a Stealthy Hood, I think I prefer, actually. But Weezing's a really strong deck right now, and it has a lot of super great matchups, but just kind of struggles with consistency.
Right. And there are that 3-card, like you said, that pretty much hurts Weezing. That's Field Blower, Mew, and what was the last card?
Stealthy Hood.
Stealthy
Hood.
Hood.
Who really wants to actually put that many tech slots in their deck for Weezing? Not a ton of people, because there's things like Stall that require multiple tech slots, and things like Reshizard that also require multiple tech spots.
Well, in this new meta now, Field Blower is already pretty much a staple in every deck now. So that's just one card. are two cards now that you have to kind of tech for. And if you're scared of your Weezing matchup, if you're scared of your Pikarom matchup, then throw Mew in there and that solves your problem. And then not most decks, I should say, a lot of decks like Zoroark and Zapdos are playing the 2 stretcher count, which you're just going to be able to get that Mew right back and then answer right back to the Tag Bolt or the Weezing spread, and that just hurts both decks, and that's kind of why it's at the bottom of tier 2, is because that Mew just hurts Weezing so much.
Right, and I've heard a lot of people saying that, well, the Mew doesn't really answer Weezing, as they'll just put a spell tag damage on it, but with the decks that Weezing is best against, like Zapdos playing 2 stretcher, you can get that Mew back basically at any point, so it really is a great card against that, but it's not enough on its own for sure.
Well, and as well as the Field Blower, if you're going to go for the spell tag answer, that's why, Zoroark is starting to play 2 Field Blowers now, is to get all of those spell tags off, and then, what does Weezing really do without spell tags? I mean, that's 40 damage that it needs pretty much to put on the board between turns.
Yeah, and with those 3 tech spots, a deck like Zapdos actually can beat Weezing, as if you stick that Stealthy Hood on the Mew and it stays, it's not going to take any damage from the ability, it's not going to take any damage from the attack, and even if, with the 1 Field Blower count, if you get rid of 2 spell tags, it will take their 2 remaining spell tags to kill that Mew.
Right.
And I know a Weezing player really just doesn't want to do that.
Right. Well, and no one really wants to target specifically the Mew when they have so many other important targets that they need to go after. If you're going against Zoroark, you want to target, not really Zoroark because it has that resistance, but maybe like the Persians or the Meowths or really anything else that's not Zoroark.
Yeah, and every time you Guzma or counter catcher that Mew, it's leaving more options on your opponent's board to be able to respond to what you have going on. So targeting the Mew with Guzma or counter catcher isn't always really the best option, as your opponent might need that energy that they already had on their Pokemon, or they might need a choice band that they already had on their Pokemon.
And even going up against Zapdos and targeting the Mew with Weezing against Zapdos, you just give it the option to put the Jirachi in the active and then Wish even more effectively than previously.
Yeah, for sure. And we're going to go ahead and get into our Tier 3 decks here. Our Tier 3 is a little bit bigger than our Tier 2, as I think there's a lot of decks that you could take to a regional or a cup and maybe have some success with, but they really just don't stack up to the other top decks. So we're going to go ahead and start off with Blacephalon GX. It's just kind of been a tried and true archetype, and it's been able to stay relevant through about every format it's been in, even when people count it out.
Definitely, and I think, both Blacephalons, Baby Blacephalon and Blacephalon GX can probably be played simultaneously. That's just my personal opinion. I think if you're trying to go to more of like a basic attacker route, you should probably go Baby Blacephalon, obviously, but I just don't think it holds enough power on its own by itself. With the green search option, you have that, but I just don't think Baby Blounce by itself can really hold up to the meta. I think maybe being played simultaneously, like I said, with Blacephalon GX, I think it could then be a good deck and a good, going forward.
Yeah, and I think Blacephalon GX really gains a lot of new cards such as Welder, Fire Crystal, cards to get energy back into your hand. It still has things like B-String, so if you run hot with the deck, you can definitely make day 2 with it going on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, even playing Blacephalon GX like it was previously is still good because now it gets the added benefit of Welder, like you said, Fire Crystal. Fire Crystal, you're going to be discarding a lot into the Lost Zone, so you may be playing a lower count, maybe a 1 of or a 2 of.
Of
course. Fiery Flint is also going to be, amazing considering you can play the Heat Factory.
Right.
Then the Naganadels, draw into your Naganadels.
Of course.
It's just, I think Blacephalon GX still remains, kind of viable and probably low tier 2, maybe high tier 3.
Yeah, it can definitely steal some wins, and one of the underrated things that people don't talk about Fiery Flint is that it's one of the craziest deck thinning cards ever. You're taking 4 cards out of your deck for the effect of an item, so it's really just going to help you draw better in general.
Yeah, and I mean, using that Fiery Flint simultaneously with a Heat Factory, maybe to draw into your Naganadels if you need it. Any other, like B-Strings maybe?
Yeah.
B-Strings would be kind of insane. You're kind of thinning out your deck with the Fire Energies to make your B-Strings play a little less optimal.
Yeah.
But it's still an option considering, I think Blacephalon GX typically plays around 10 to 12 energy, or more than that, sorry, about 16 energy,
isn't it? Yeah,
it
plays a ton.
Yeah. So, I mean, those B-String turns still are pretty viable, especially with Fiery Flint. Not especially with Fiery Flint, but,
Despite Fiery Flint.
Yeah, exactly, despite Fiery Flint.
Yeah, and moving on with Blacephalon, we actually have the Baby Blacephalon archetype.
Yeah.
It hasn't really been proven yet as being strong, but the card just has so much potential that I can't really bring myself to rank it less than Tier 3, as if you run hot and you have a really good list for it, you can have success with the deck for sure.
And that was something similar to like the argument we had with Zoroark earlier in the season, earlier in this Unbroken Bonds release, that, Colby kind of thought Baby Blacephalon would be bad. I still think it's kind of bad. Green Search, Baby Blacephalon is probably the best option. I just don't think it really holds a candle to much of Tier 1 or Tier 2, really.
Yeah, and it kind of loses to high Judge or Marshadow counts as well
Yeah.
as it may be able to draw out of one Marshadow or one Judge, but two, I don't really think it can really do too much against.
Yeah, and it's similar to, stockpiling, like Zapdos stockpiles Electric Powers. If you judge that hand, then what's their plan from there? They have to restockpile those Electric Powers, as well as, going back to Baby Cephalon, where they have to stockpile energies maybe for a couple turns.
Right.
If you judge that, what's really their answer? Because they've already utilized their greens, they've already utilized whatever resources they have to find those multiple energies, like the Fiery Flints and the greens.
Right, if you judge them and then take a knockout, they're going to have to find two energies and a
Exactly.
welder to get into their combo. So it's not something they can always draw out of, let alone twice.
Yeah, and personally, being the Zoroark player and as a Weezing player, I don't have a whole lot of respect for Baby Blacephalon. I think it's probably low Tier 3, and I don't think you'll see much of a showing in it in any regional or major event coming up soon.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect too much of it either. We'll go ahead and move on to the Shedinja deck, something that DDG piloted at the last regional, and something that was thought of as a meme when Pedro introduced it
Right.
and called it Binder Box. But it can take some free wins if your opponent doesn't know how to play against it or just doesn't want to play against it, and it's a decent strategy, but it can be countered pretty easily.
Right, and I think even with the higher Field Blower count in a lot of decks, and Field Blower being a must pretty much in this meta, I think that kind of, goes away with the Shedinja, and I think Shedinja was just kind of a pop-up list that just ended up happening, and DDG played it, and they can pretty much have success with whatever they want. You look at the list, and it's just pretty much a meme. It's something very interesting that I don't think you'll see a whole lot in this next regional.
Yeah,
as
I
well.
wouldn't expect to see too much of it,
No.
but control decks are always powerful in some capacity as people just don't know how to play against them, don't tech for them, or don't even want to play against them.
Well, and even Control and Stall are almost one of the same. They're a little bit different gameplay, but I think if you wanted to be a Shedinja player, you're probably more opt to go into the Stall player now, as for Lucario Melmetal, since it's probably a better, gameplay that you like. Control is just a little more thought process, whereas Lucario Melmetal is going to give you that option to just kind of control the field as well as, stall them out, and, whatever Stall and Control does, I think that's just going to be the better option as opposed to Shedinja now.
Yeah, and even players that have played Shedinja, such as Azul, have said they didn't enjoy playing it and probably
Right.
don't want to play it again, refuse to play it online because it's just a boring deck that really nobody enjoys playing or playing against.
Right, and I actually saw a meme today that was it was two pictures, and it was like, waste 45 minutes of yours and your opponent's life, or play Shedinja.
Yeah.
And it pretty much said this is the same picture.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. It's not fun. Nobody wants to do it. So we'll go ahead and move on to our next archetype in Tier 3, and that's going to be Nidoqueen Meganium Swampert. And this is a deck I've been testing a lot recently and really just been trying to get a good list down pat for. As if you do get a great list, I think the deck has a ton of potential, and it's so strong once you get set up, to the point where I actually think it's almost unbeatable once you get the board state that you want. And the real problem with the deck is really finding the consistency to get all of that set up.
Yeah, absolutely. And Colby and I have been testing a lot. My Zoroark Persian list and his Nidoqueen list. Zoroark struggles with hitting those numbers on Nidoqueen, the 150, the 160 numbers. And his list, the Nidoqueen list, struggles against Make 'em Pay, because sometimes, you get greedy with Power Draw. Any player really gets greedy with Power Draw, and you get a big hand, you get a lot of energies in hand, you don't use those triple accelerations when you don't need to, and Make 'em Pay comes up, and you just discard all those energies on hand. And that's pretty much how I've won majority of the games against Nidoqueen if he sets up. Judge also hurts Nidoqueen a lot, considering you need the rare candies into your Meganiums, and then, consistency into other Pokemon after that with the Swamperts and the Nidoqueens. But it is an incredibly powerful deck if you get set up, and like you said, if you get a board state set up well enough, it's almost unbeatable.
Yeah, and something like Make 'em Pay has already made me put cards like a Rangaroo and a Basic Energy in my deck just to get those energies back. And originally I thought it might have some trouble finding its energies, so I was playing a 2 double colorless and a counter gain, as well as 3 energy lottos to really help me get into those energies. But I found the deck really just wants to set up, and after you get set up, you kind of just win, and you will find your energies eventually. And the deck can afford to miss attacks, as it just does the swing for 260.
Yeah, and I think the option of going, as opposed to the 2 double colorless and counter gain play, going instead to the resource management play into getting your Triple Acceleration is back, is it probably better, considering you can afford probably 1 or 2 turns with Nidoqueen, and you can still set up with your Meganiums if you need to in a crisis situation.
Yeah, usually you can afford to give up that prize that a Ranger is going to give you, and while you're only going to get it off once because it's only playing 1 basic energy, or twice if you decide to commit your Super Boost energy to it, that 1 or 2 times will get you enough value out of it that you need.
Exactly, and like you were saying, like it can hit that 260 number, which is knocking out so many of the Tag Team GXs that we have in this format. It's going to knock out Pikarom, Reshizard if you get the Shrine play as well, because I know you have a 1-of Shrine in there.
Right.
Snorlax, since being played in Reshizard now, so many of the tag team Pokemon
it can honestly knock out everything except for a Lucario Melmetal, and if you're able to stick Shrine for long enough, you can even do that. So they're not going to hit their healing cards every turn, so you even stand kind of a chance against Stall playing that Resource Management of Rangaroo.
Yeah, and you were talking about how you feel like you're going to lose in the first 4 or 5 turns. Do you want to kind of go in more into that, about how it feels in the first 4 or 5 turns, and like what your game plan really is?
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. The deck really just doesn't feel great as you're setting up because it is slow. It's very slow, as you really just want to build multiple supporters into your hand. And the deck plays green, so you really need to decide, is playing this rare candy to get one of my stage 2s out, even though I won't have an answer to doing anything next turn, worth it, or should I just wait a turn so I can use another greens next turn? So it's something you have to definitely test before you play, and I wouldn't just go into regional or cup play and get unprepared.
Yeah. Very interesting list. It's kind of popped up probably in the last week or so here.
Yeah.
Kind of opting more from the Empoleon Swampert list now into Nidoqueen Swampert. Power Draw is an insane ability, so that's kind of what's making Nidoqueen more viable. But
yeah, and that's kind of something that I said immediately when I saw that the Nidoqueen Swampert deck did good in Singapore SP. I told Chandler immediately that it was Swampoleon 2.0. And Swampoleon was a deck that I loved when it first came out, and I had a lot of success with, so I immediately was drawn to the deck, and I've had a lot of fun with it, and I'm still trying to perfect the list so that I think it could be competitive.
Yeah, definitely. I think really the only downfall I see to Nidoqueen, it really is the only 4 count of Triple Acceleration and the Super Boost energy that gives the deck only 5 energy, which is really sometimes what you only need if you get set up and you can afford a couple prizes. Maybe late game, that's where it's going to start hurting if you've kind of utilized the Nidoqueen's attack a few turns and you're not finding your energy. I think that's the only time it's going to hurt. And the only other thing that would probably hurt the deck is Make 'em Pay and Judge, where you're not going to be seeing a whole lot of Make 'em Pay. I don't think a lot of Zoro Persian players are going to be playing Make 'em Pay unless they feel like their stall matchup isn't very great. And then Judge is really going to be the only thing that... There's only 2 or 3 cards that really hurts Nidoqueen, honestly.
Yeah, but they really do hurt Nidoqueen a lot.
Yeah.
But Nidoqueen's just such a strong deck, and I definitely wouldn't just be playing the 4 Triple Acceleration and the Super Boost. I'd be playing either a count of double colorless and counter gain, but I actually prefer the Oranguru just to get back those energies. And sometimes Guzmas and Structures as well.
I'd probably agree with that. Like you said, the 1 energy and then the Resource Management just to bring back in the Triple Accelerations energies, because you can afford that knockout in the Oranguru like we discussed earlier.
Right.
So moving on from that, we have seen Nagaquag. This is something that sticked in
format.
Team Up. It was even before Team Up format as well. That Nagaquag
it kind of made an appearance before Team Up in Lost Thunder format, but it really got popularized a little bit in Team Up format with the release of these tag teams like Magikarp, Wailord, and even things like Eevee, Snorlax. But I just kind of think it has 1 or 2 great matchups and then just kind of loses to everything else.
Right. I don't... again, this is one of those decks I don't respect greatly. It's not saying that it doesn't deserve respect. It's just something I'm not scared of. If I were to go into a cup and I were to see Nagaquag, I would not be incredibly worried about it. I just feel like it's a little inconsistent, especially if you can judge it. Zoroark has a great matchup against it, which is typically what I play in my cups. Even playing that Onix and maybe even the Fighting Quag if you so opt to do it. That's only 1 of typically in every Nagaquag deck. We did see it show 3 or 4 places at Santa Clara. So, like I said, it's not something that you can just completely disrespect, but it's just not something I would be very scared of going into Madison, especially.
Yeah, it's something that just you take into a tournament, and you're going to beat things like Pikarom, and you're going to beat things like Reshiram Charizard, maybe. The thing about Reshiram Charizard is it can kind of just roll its bad matchups anyways because it's so aggressive, but other than that, if you only hit like 2 Peak Rom, 2 Reshiram Charizard, I mean, I can't really see the deck taking more than one more win after that.
Right. Yeah, if you get really any other matchup, especially a Zapdos matchup.
Right.
I mean, even though, Naganadel has 130 HP and Quagsire has 120 HP, which is kind of bad math for Zapdos, I still think the matchup is incredibly in Zapdos' favor pretty well.
Yeah, they're still going to have to bench those evolving basics every
Right.
time you take a knockout, so you can just take advantage of that as Zapdos abuses Guzma like no card has before.
And late game, you can even go into the Tapu Koko GX way and just take the last 2 knockouts probably late game
Right,
against Nagaquag.
Right, and with things like Mew that a lot of people are playing in their Zapdos deck, you completely remove that Towering Splash GX option from your opponent, so I really wouldn't be recommending Nagquag to go into your future regionals and cups.
I would say the best credit I could probably give Nagaquag is the fact that you can stockpile energy multiple turns. Wishful Baton, we didn't mention about Nagaquag being in this now, is really helpful. We didn't really see it a whole lot played in previous Nagaquag lists, but being played simultaneously with Wailord Magikarp Tag Team GX, probably helps that Wishful Baton being more optimal now. The only thing I can credit to Quagsire is the fact that you can stockpile those energies and then, wash out completely to Quagsire, and Quagsire can slap for a lot once you get a lot of energy on the board.
Right, and a lot of people really just don't consider that Quagsire as an attacker when they're making plays on their turn, so you can kind of sneak up on them with it, but if you're playing a good player, that's not going to be a viable strategy, and with a lot of decks playing Mew now, it kind of just makes that Magikarp and Wailord a bad card, as those 6 energies that you have to use, its 180 attack can just be annihilated by things like Tapu Koko GX, and if you can't get that Towering Splash off, it's not really worth playing the card.
Yeah, and the Towering Splash is very important, especially against your Zapdos matchup and other sort of, maybe even your Weezing matchup as well. So kind of moving on from there, we have our Tier 4 kind of rogue decks. We saw one Vikavolt Charjabug slip into Day 2 of Santa Clara. Very interesting to me. As soon as the Charjabug came out, I was somewhat interested into it, because as soon as Sun and Moon Base released a couple of years ago, I was interested in Vikavolt GX.
Right.
Now the Vikavolt ability, where you can attach the grass and electric every turn, correct? Right. Played simultaneously with the Charjabug is very interesting to me. It is rogue. It is probably inconsistent unless it's played with Jirachi. It could be a little more consistent.
Right.
Very interesting concept to me to see in Day 2.
Yeah, the thing about the Vikavolt deck is it's not even playing the Sun and Moon Vikavolt. It's just playing the new one that can just do 220 and then removes weakness if you have a Stadium. But a lot of things I've heard is that it just loses to a Judge or a Marshadow early, and it doesn't really have like a ton of great matchups, and it kind of just seems like an inferior Stage 2 deck to something like Nidoqueen that absolutely cannot lose if you set up, where if you're trying to set up a Stage 2, I would much rather not be able to lose after that.
Yeah, initially, like I said, coming out of the gate, I thought it might be played with the other Vikavolts, but it looks like you said, you're just playing with the Unbroken Bonds, Vikavolt. It does need to be played with Jirachi, or it's gonna pretty much brick almost every time.
Right. Yeah.
So like I said, I don't imagine seeing this a whole lot of in Madison. In Day 2 at least, you might see it in Day 1, maybe like the mid tables, but it's kind of a quirky deck that you might see around.
Yeah, for sure. And we won't really spend too much time on these rogue decks, as they're not really great options, and I wouldn't expect to see too much of them. But we do have Malamar listed in our rogue decks, which may be kind of a controversial pick, as Malamar has always been a strong choice, and it does have showings in these Day 2 regionals, but I believe that's more of just Malamar faithful coming in and playing the deck that they're comfortable with, as opposed to it actually having good matchups. And now with people playing Mew, that Ultra Necrozma GX's Sky Scorching Light is even worse, and that was one of the big selling points to that card against decks like Zapdos.
Yeah, definitely. I think your Malamar probably is definitely going to go much, much lower now. You're seeing it, at least, in major tournaments, is going to go much down. You're probably going to be seeing like your Tier 1, your two decks. I'm sorry. It's just these Tier 4 lists, these rogue decks. I wouldn't even consider Malamar rogue, really. It's just not the most optimal play anymore.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think Ultra Necrozma is probably the correct way to even play Malamar anymore, as Ultra Necrozma just doesn't really get it done against even things like Pikarom. It needs a ton of Zapdos. Rushizard. It needs a ton of energies to knock out a Rushizard, so I wouldn't be playing Malamar. I don't really love Malamar, and its consistency isn't there, and if your matchups aren't there either, I wouldn't recommend playing the deck.
Right, and we had talked a couple episodes ago about how Malamar kind of slipped up against as a power hitter against these new, not tag team decks. Sorry, thank you. Pikarom, Reshizard, it's not the power hitter anymore, as opposed to before going into the team up format. It was actually a power hitter.
It was one of the big one-shot decks,
right.
But it's kind of just been outclassed by other decks.
You do see Malamar Giratina as more of a spread pick-at-you deck.
Yeah.
But I don't even think that's really the most viable Malamar option anymore. I think we just kind of say goodbye to Malamar after, this next
regional?
Yeah, this next
regional.
regional.
I don't think it's really too great in this Broken Bonds format either.
No.
We'll go ahead and move on to Gardevoir Sylveon GX. It's a deck that hasn't really seen a ton of play, but in testing, it's been a pretty strong archetype and definitely has some advantages to it. Has some pretty good matchups such as Weezing, Zapdos, and Zoroark, so definitely something if you're wanting to counter a few specific decks you could play, but I wouldn't take it to a regional knowing that Reshizard is going to be the most popular deck in format.
I think, honestly, the only reason I don't respect this as a Tier 3 or Tier 2 deck is because of the lack of power that it has.
Right.
It doesn't really put an insane amount of aggression
right.
on anything. You have the Fairy Charms, which is pretty much its only added benefit for tool cards, because Choice Bands are probably a little less optimal
right.
Since you have those Fairy Charm, or those Charm options. But, I just don't... the lack of power just does not show to me, really.
Yeah, and if you're just trying to play against decks that don't one-shot you, it has a ton of healing options. That GX attack can be pretty powerful, making you shuffle your hand back into your deck. So if your opponent kind of falters a little bit and missteps in their early setup, Gardevoir can really take advantage of that really well, like some decks like Reshizard and Pikarom can. But against decks like Reshizard and Pikarom, I think it could struggle, especially if Pikarom's playing a blower to get around those Fairy Charms.
Right, and I think even Zoroark, it doesn't have an amazing matchup, especially with resistance and the Ace Roll and the healing, but Zoroark can still make it work, and that's the glory of Zoroark, and that's the downfall of Gardevoir Sylveon, really, is like, it doesn't have power, it doesn't have a whole lot of consistency. Greens helps it quite a bit, but that then wastes your Greens turn into, if you Greens for an Acerola, that means another turn you have to wait, and if you Greens for Max Potions, that means you have to discard energy.
Right.
Unless you Kaleidostorm and
right,
the bench
that's the
like
thing
that.
about the Greens build in Gardevoir Sylveon. The Greens can really just get you any other supporter effects you would want, such as the Miss Magius to draw cards,
that's true.
Or the custom counter catchers, as I think that's clearly a superior option in those decks, because you can just Miss Magius and use a counter catcher really early, which I've seen to be a pretty strong play. So it has options, it just doesn't have a ton of power right now. I
think it probably gets more viable after rotation, honestly. I don't think going into Madison you're really not going to see a whole lot of Gardevoir Sylveon, but like I said, it's really probably only going to see play after rotation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think that's going to be about it from us today, guys. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up. From Team No Leak, go ahead and like this video, our Facebook page, Team No Leak. You got anything to say, Chandler?
No, just go ahead and go to our YouTube page and subscribe and like this video. And like Kobe said, give us a like on Facebook.
Thanks, guys.
Yep, thanks, guys.